There it is.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the Picard Maneuver. My name's Tim.
And I'm Joel.
And we're going to talk about Star Trek Picard, Season 2, Episode 3, Assimilation.
Correct. Take a little sip here.
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
And we're back. All right, we did a cold open there.
We did a cold open. That was fun. We had never done that before.
Nope.
And another thing to note is we're back in our new studio, the Picard Maneuver Studio, Studio 6, down at Lincoln Hall.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, so we saw Episode 3, Assimilation. I think from our original talk, I think I liked the episode more than you did. I found it sort of a fun episode. It was a lot lower stakes, more of an establishing, filling in the gaps. It seems like we're going to spend some time here, whereas the first two episodes were very fast and moving around.
So to reiterate and concur, yes, I was less of a fan. It's my least favorite episode so far, which I didn't hate it. I just didn't like it as much. My issue was that it's a quicker episode. I think it was a little bit shorter in running time, and it felt like it was light on content in that I didn't feel like I got to know any characters better. I didn't feel like I don't know. It just didn't feel heavy enough in a way that it didn't have enough substance. Not that it didn't have enough action or enough whatever was going on, but I just felt like almost they were trying to keep too much action to a point where like there wasn't any moments where I got to really get to know a character more.
I noticed it was an oddly paced episode, as you say. It was short, and it was already past the halfway mark before they sort of split up and do anything in the episode too. Yeah,
and we'll get into we have some screenshots to share while we talk about the episode, and we'll get into some of the things that, in my opinion, just would drag on, and we could have moved on from these moments a lot faster to maybe have more happen that would have been a little more, I don't know, intriguing or interesting or believable.
I found it a very fun episode, though. I always have fun where we go back in time and sort of contrast with current time with where we're at now. And we've seen that a lot, so I'll do a little bit of comparison with some of the classic Star Trek episodes where they've gone back in time and movies.
I'm getting used to cutting between cameras here, so forgive my chaos. But I do want you to talk about that because I think Star Trek many times has successfully done some of these fun back in time to the Earth at a different time. And what I would say is this episode, like you're saying, it's fun that they did that, but like I didn't really notice anything in the episode that really tipped its hat to like we're in 2024. It was just more like so I think sometimes the setting can be a character in something you're watching. And in this case, it just felt flat again to me. Like I didn't see anything interesting about the Earth now.
It felt to me like they were in Los Angeles. Well, let's get into it.
Well, no, I'm not saying they weren't in Los Angeles. I'm saying that there was nothing to Los Angeles that was like, hey, this is cool. So that was my issue. Yeah, they're definitely in Los Angeles because they played the song, the California. Like we couldn't mistake it. Anyway.
Well, let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
They also had a cold open and quickly wrapping up where we were at the end of the episode too.
Mm-hmm. So we go into our stills, our screenshots.
Yeah, let's go to the first screenshot. What do we have there?
Let's get this out of here. So this is where we left off episode 2 with kind of a standoff. And then we come back in. It's a little dark there, so hopefully you can see what's going on there. But we come back, and let's just skip. This one's a little easier to see. So to the standoff that we left in our previous episode.
Yeah, and we had some questions about whether this guy was going to stay around, but they don't last. It takes like 20 seconds for them to sort of fight back and kill them all. The interesting dynamic is that apparently the dark universe versions of the phasers they seem a little more disruptors. They weren't like phasery. They were more disruptory. They don't have a stun setting. They immediately sort of evaporate the person. Yeah. Except for when they hit Elnor and
hurt his shoulder. Oh well.
He dies a little slower in a more dramatic way.
So it was a little extreme to see them, because usually we're used to in Star Trek, like when people get hit, they don't usually get evaporated unless it's like a really dramatic moment. Like I remember there's the episode where Data is taken by a collector.
Right, the Viron T disruptor. I was thinking of that too, because they make a big deal about how painful it is with the Viron T disruptor.
It's a terrible way to die. it like evaporates you from the inside out or something.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the episode, like you're supposed to really hate this guy, and he uses it on his assistant, which is just like terrible.
Right. Who we sort of.
I recommend this
friends.
episode. It's not like necessarily one of the best TNG
The most
episodes.
toys?
Is that what it was called?
I believe so.
But it's definitely a kind of a funny episode to watch because he just
No, I
wants...
feel that's definitely up top 20.
Do you really? Okay. Well, I'm not going to argue.
Maybe not top 10, but
It's a decent episode, but anyway. So there's this disruptor that he keeps because he's a collector, and it's like it was banned by the Federation because like it's just too evil of a weapon, and it does what these weapons did, and maybe they did that on purpose. Maybe like that's an evil weapon. It just like evaporates people. I don't know. Elnor seems to be suffering a lot more than those people did.
right. And he was just sort of hitting the shoulder. Presumably, there's something about. So if they don't do the evaporation thing, there's something that's very deadly about these wounds.
Poisonous phasers.
Poisonous phasers. Okay,
so back to the screenshot. So as I said, this is the Seven's, I guess, husband in this world, and also like pretty high ranking. So we talked last time about why doesn't Seven just use her authority to kind of say, hey, like stop what you're doing. She tries, doesn't work. This is right after, because at the same time that this is all happening, the drama unfolding, Elnor is still suffering, and Raffi's kind of tending to him and saying like, hey, you know, and he's like, I don't know. He's got his green blood there going.
Do you have any screenshots later on when he dies, or do you?
I do.
All right, well, let's talk about that then when we see that.
Yeah. So anyway,
next thing,
so that's still happening. So at the same time, no, this is after. So this is after they deal with that. So like you said, they deal with that pretty quick with like just a, martial arts, basically.
Makes sense.
They use their fighting skills to get rid of these guys on the bridge. And then they're like, okay, well, we need to do a time jump.
The slingshot around the sun.
Right. And so she basically gets her wires all connected. And here we go. This is us going through time and space.
I really like this sort of the traveling time animation. It was a little more interesting version of what we've sort of seen in the Voyage Home and some original series episodes.
Yeah, it was cool looking. I didn't screenshot it, but there were several characters who it kind of showed them as they were jumping through time, reacting and having different emotional kind of reactions to what was going on, including Agnes, who at the time when I saw the episode, I said, oh, she's got a single tear, and I was, I should have screenshotted it because it's kind of funny. I didn't. What I noticed watching it again is that the tear was going in reverse, so it was showing that they were like,
it started going down and then it went back up.
Yeah.
So
it was just kind of showing that time was then they were messing with time, and here we go. So they did this.
And there's a line the Borg Queen says at one point, just as they're doing this, she says, the past is now.
Oh, yeah. Which, like, I guess that's her slogan when she decides to run for Borg president. So here we go. They've gone through time, and they come out of their wormhole, time warp, to see what
2024
is
Earth.
Fairly similar to present, well, should be, like a two years in the future from us, Earth. So really, it's basically our Earth.
And I think, and as we've seen before, after sort of the slingshotting around the sun, the ship is usually in a pretty bad place, and they end up crash landing. One thing that was interesting is they don't know where to crash land, and then Picard says, "I'll take the con and control the crash. We're going home," and they don't make it clear where he crashes because he crashed into some sort of woods.
That's a good point.
I thought
he says we're
the
going
implication
home.
was they were crashing in the middle of France.
Why did we lose a camera there?
But the woods to me reminded me of the Generation scene where the saucer section crashes. But it looked more like a I don't know the term, but like evergreen type trees than like southern.
Sorry, I know
southern or central.
Oh,
France.
there's that camera back. Why did we lose this camera?
Oh, we lost the camera?
Yeah. I might have to get up and see if I can get it. Might have just turned off. We're still figuring all the new setup out here. So, so it's a good point. I was distracted there, and I'm gonna go mess with this and see if I can get it. Maybe the HDMI is like the HDMI cable is kind of like messed up. You can watch me while I mess with this. Let's go back to this, and if you want to even like swing through these, I'm just gonna
okay. Well, I can talk a little bit about some of the stuff they're dealing with the time and travel. So whenever we've dealt with time travel, they always sort of contrast with the world that they exist in. We've been back to around, I think would have been 2017 was the Deep Space Nine episode where they go back in time, and they live in sort of a parallel San Francisco, where they've the cultures there's a lot more segregated between poor people, are sort of removed from society, and they deal with that sort of stuff. And I think this episode does touch on it. Raffi beams down, as we'll see, to a tent community, and they also touch on ideas like the climate change and the fires in California, and they make reference to the fact that the state of the planet Earth at the time. Raffi says something along the lines about the contradictions in on Earth between different levels of society.
Coming back. What is going on with this battery? Sorry. We might have to cancel this camera. It should be able to run. It says change battery, but it's plugged in. That's the whole point, is that it shouldn't have to change battery. Keep talking to them.
Oh well, it happens. And then we...
Makes no sense to me.
Go to the next screenshot. So yeah, that screenshot actually is too dark for anyone to see, really. So as they're sort of crash landing on the ship, part of the problem is that the Borg Queen has sort of injured herself or spent too much energy in time traveling, and then she sort of starts zapping all the energy from the ship, leaving, and Elnor's relying on health, on life support, and by the Borg Queen taking the power, that seems to kill Elnor, which to me seems like a very sort of awkward roundabout way for to say the reason Elnor died. Elnor died because he was shot with a disruptor. I don't really understand what the power of the ship would have been doing for him at the time. There was a line that Seven says something along the line of dermal shielding or dermal something to sort of prevent him from bleeding, but that becomes a plot point soon after this, because Raffi criticizes Picard's handling of the situation very aggressively over Elnor dying, and then sort of blames Picard for it, and then blames Picard for Q's behavior, which on two levels I didn't think was really fair. First, Picard has never really played along with Q in that respect. I don't know where she was coming from there, but also I don't feel like Q's done anything bad for them.
Not sure why.
And ultimately, we're in a parallel time period back in time. There's no real strong reason for us, at least as the viewer, to think Elnor's dead for good.
I want to talk about some of this stuff too again.
Yeah. So maybe I won't go too far into that. I could talk
just give me like another. I'm just gonna throw a different battery in. Hopefully the viewers can hear me. We are trying to deal with the problem.
Fair.
This is the issue with having a tissue.
Mm. What are some other times we've seen gone back in time?
It's doing weird stuff right now.
There was an episode where Voyager, I guess what this episode most reminded me as far as time travel, because Voyager went back in time, and I think it was in Los Angeles, in Future's End, the two-parter episode with Sarah Silverman. And Sarah Silverman's working at the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, and that sort of becomes a plot point in that episode. And we do see a shot of the Griffith Observatory when in that sort of Miami Vice-esque montage with California Dreaming that introduces the scene when they were just about to beam in. And I thought that was pretty cool, because I've always wanted to see Griffith Observatory, and that's a pretty classic. Hey, we're back.
There we are. Okay. I'll be right there. I'm just going to make sure everything's good here. Yeah, looks like it's back. Okay. Forgive me, I have no idea why that camera decided to just not work for a minute. We will troubleshoot all this stuff, and hopefully we won't have these problems next time. Here okay. I am. Okay, so you were talking about Raffi and Elnor. I wanted to talk about, I heard you bring up, oh gosh, now I'm trying to remember what it was. You brought up something back here. Can I go back in the stills?
There wasn't
crashing.
Really any good skills between that and that.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot, was there? Well, let's move on.
Yeah, well, I mean,
don't
Elnor
remember
died.
exactly what I was
The
saying.
only thing I'd add there too is just I was actually really looking forward to Elnor going back in time, because he's the most sort of fish out of water character. That'd be sort of interesting to see him interacting with people in our time.
Yeah,
and
he's got that innocence that would have been fun to see him deal with that situation. And I think you're probably thinking a little bit about when Spock was.
Yeah, some of the classic examples of Spock wearing a hat or a bandana to sort of to distract from his ears. And there's one where Kira goes back in time and she just puts on a Band-Aid over her nose.
Right.
And they always sort of have an excuse for why he's acting weird. Because I guess in the Voyage Home, Spock is sort of really spaced out, because that's when he had just come back to life after the search for Spock. And then it was sort of an interesting, he was kind of like, they so he had to take LSD or LDS when they had the acronym wrong, but like that was sort of an interesting, like that I was really expecting Elnor to be there, but maybe we've seen that before too.
We have, but I think there's a few things that they did in this episode that we had seen before.
That's
to some degree. Like, I mean, you brought up, I think
that's true. We'll
maybe
talk
we
about
talked
more
before
about
how the ship just kind of, once they came into the atmosphere of the Earth, they were like, oh, well, now we're crash landing, and that's been done, like them crash landing after traveling through time. And I guess it's one of those things where how else, like, they wanted to immediately cause drama and cause a situation.
Well, the characters really got to
felt a
split
little-
up and solve stuff separately for the narrative at this point to work, so they just did that. But as I said, whenever they've done the slingshot around the sun, often that is very damaging for the ship, and then they're out of energy, and that's usually what's happened. Not always, though. I think one time they did the slingshot around the ship before the episode even started, and the ship was fine. So.
Yeah. Well, so to me, I'd think of it as less of a technology problem and more of a, like, the writers need a reason for stuff to happen. But
Fair,
yeah, it's been done. So Raffi sad. Oh, I know what you were talking about. I heard you saying, it's very dark, but I heard you saying that she was like really
she blamed Picard.
pissed at Picard.
Unfairly, we think.
Yeah, and she also was like, you and the cahoots, you and the Q are always in cahoots, like trying to mess with humanity and all this stuff. And I kind of felt that was, and I heard you say this, it was a little unfair to Picard to say that in the moment. And yes, Raffi was obviously emotional, and I have no problem with that. Like, a character is emotional and something terrible is happening. The other thing that I found a little bit annoying is that, not annoying, I shouldn't say annoying, but I could tell in this moment that probably Elnor's going to be fine through this fact that they're in a different timeline. So that's fine.
So our stakes, Raffi doesn't share the stakes with us, is the problem.
Well, so I guess the issue I had is that then she brings it up to Agnes and says, is he going to be okay in the other timeline? And Agnes is like, we don't know. And she's like, tell me he's going to be okay in the other time. So it's one thing for the characters, the audience, to know something that maybe the characters don't know. But in this case, she kind of tries to find out what the audience knows by asking Agnes about it, which makes you realize that the stakes aren't even as high for them, because she knows that there's a good chance that Elnor will be fine in the other timeline. Anyway.
Well, they're all dead anyway in the regular timeline, so whatevs.
We all dead in the regular time. Okay. So moving on. Okay, so I wanted to highlight this, and this is, I don't know if it's bright enough for people to see, but let's see. So here we go. One shot of looking through a closet. Two shots. There's 7 looking through a closet. Another shot of 7 changing an item of clothing. And I think we're missing the...
Yeah, Rios grabs it.
Rios also...
Smells a shirt.
Yeah, so I'll go to this one because it's maybe the brightest. Probably 5 minutes of this episode is spent looking for clothes to wear on Earth. And
right, or feels like 5 minutes.
It felt longer than it needed to be, given the fact that a lot of... So I was noting that in other Star Treks, or even other sci-fis, where people end up at a different timeline, usually the filmmakers just have that, the audience doesn't have to see them find the outfits.
Yeah, usually
we
not.
just assume that, like, okay.
It's usually like everyone steps onto the transporter and they already have the
have them on, yeah.
Which is usually a pretty shocking thing. It's actually less so, like we're talking, their uniforms, they don't even look that much different than they already looked, or they usually they looked last season.
That's the other note that you made.
Usually on Star Trek, it is sort of a more shocking thing when
it's more of a uniform,
because we always, like, almost all the time we just see them in their bright Starfleet uniforms, and then when they're just in like modern clothes, it's much more of a shock for us.
Absolutely. So in this situation, not only do they spend a lot of time on it, but every item that I don't know if you can see them well here, but all the items in the closet look the same as what they're already wearing, And they're all basically just kind of like dark turtlenecks and button-up shirts. And I didn't screenshot it, but there's actually a moment where Rios is wearing a nice dark button-up shirt. And while he's wearing that shirt that would have looked fine on Earth in 2024, he grabs another shirt to put on. And that's where you said, I think he smells the shirt. So anyway, not to get fixated on this, but...
And later in the episode, I believe the doctor he meets does make a comment about his weird clothes, which I thought was an odd...
Yeah, exactly.
Clothes wasn't that weird, but
no. So that I think that's part of the issue is that 2024 clothes look very similar to I think the clothes that the stylist has chosen to dress the crew in. They're not wearing uniforms.
Intentional because they're not Starfleet, or at least that's been confused a little bit. But for the most part, they're not in Starfleet.
So all that to say, I think that this whole sequence of like looking for clothes, ripping a symbol off of a sleeve. I just think it was a little bit of a waste of time from the show.
So they beamed down?
Yeah, so they beamed down to Earth, which
and I already
was
talked
inevitable.
A little bit about that sequence.
It's funny how we're not giving context to this image. I'm just like, they beamed down to Earth, and people are like, okay, this is not any of them. This is a child.
And she's in the middle of talking.
So 3 of them beam down. Raffi's spot where she ends up beaming is pretty uneventful. She's like between 2 like gross-looking RVs. 7 of 9 beams down in front of this child who then says, are you a superhero? Which I guess is maybe a nod to like kids these days would probably think that because they watch so many superhero movies. 7 of 9 winks at her. It's kind of cute. I don't know.
Yeah, I liked it.
But then, okay, yeah, so I grabbed this too because I thought, it was kind of a cute moment. Right. We switched Rios's, they're in a different folder.
Yeah, so, that's what I was thinking.
We'll talk about that after.
We can talk about Agnes and Picard, and then we can talk about them, and we can talk about Rios.
So we're going to stick now with 7 and Raffi because they kind of end up on Earth together. So here's the moment of like, yes, I'm a superhero. It's kind of cute. So
they need to go up the top of a skyscraper to do the scan to find the Watcher.
Mm-hmm. And in doing so, they run into security, and then they kind of have, I guess there's a bit of comic relief where they con the security guard by saying, we talked to one of the other security guards. Oh, what's his name again?
Jim.
Was it Jim?
I think so, yeah.
Something like that, yeah. And then he says, oh, was it, makes the classic mistake of like bringing up a name, and they're like, yeah, that was him. And then they say, and also he was really nice and fun. And like, you don't want, I guess he's the fun one. And he says something like, oh, I want to be the fun one. And like, so you guys can go do whatever you want now so I can be the fun one.
Yeah, I was saying I actually like this scene because I think it's really the first time we've seen them as a sort of a couple in a relationship. Like that was sort of introduced very quickly in the last sort of pan at the very end of the last season, and then in the first episode there was a quick discussion between them but we haven't actually seen them just as a couple hanging out or doing couple stuff. So I thought it was I liked that scene for this.
Yeah, so I guess you could say that it added a little bit more backstory or more depth to them as a couple, as characters, and that's good, and I like that. And it was a lighthearted scene, and so I guess it does kind of reminds me a little bit of some of the scenes that they would have in other Star Treks where they would go back in time or something where they
always have to get an excuse to break into something, and they don't know about money and things like that.
Right, but I thought it was funny how they were like, "Don't you want to be the fun one?" And he's like, "I want to be the fun one." So for any security guards out there, don't get fooled by this one. So they're on this tower, and then what? And they're looking for the Watcher. They haven't been told anything else.
Yeah, they do some scanning, and then they do detect something at MacArthur Park, and then they lose that, and then they think they found Rios. So I think that's where they're gonna go next episode.
Oh right, so here's where they're picking up Rios, or at least the comm badge, which was taken by a child. But right before this moment that I screenshotted, MacArthur Park.
Yeah, MacArthur Park is
when they see a little blip, and they're like, "That could be."
That's a famous park in Los Angeles.
Okay, I didn't know that. So I'm assuming that's where they're headed to next. Although they're also going to look for Rios, clearly, because they haven't been able to get a hold of him. And anyway, so that's that. And okay, that's all of the screenshots. This was a pretty simple episode, so we didn't have a lot of detail on the.
They spent half the episode, like I was saying, over half of it, just wrapping up and time jumping. So let's take a middle. So next we'll go to Agnes and Picard, which I honestly I was having more fun down on Earth in Los Angeles, and so the way they cut back and forth between Agnes and Picard and down, I was sort of more annoyed than I would have been with their sort of story.
Yeah,
I guess it was important for them to sort of resolve a dynamic, because we don't really know what their dynamic is with the Borg Queen at all at this point. So at the very least, resolving a dynamic with the Borg Queen and then sort of getting some information was important for them to do. But I wasn't that interested in it. We didn't see any. I was saying if this was in some of the old Star Treks, they could have done an entire episode entirely in a dream sequence inside of Agnes's head to try to learn. Like they did that with the Deep Space Nine episode, where they did like an entire A plot inside a character's head trying to find a secret, and a couple different ways, a couple times. So, but I guess I'm glad they didn't commit a whole episode to this.
Yeah, well, and it's not the way they're telling stories through like current television. I'm sorry that thing keeps popping up. Oh, you wouldn't have seen it anyway. You're on me. Is now trying to keep the action high and keep the plot moving a little bit more. So I don't think they were going to dedicate a bunch of, and her character isn't, I guess, important enough to really focus on her the whole episode. But anyway, there was a few things about this that I agree kind of felt patched on, or felt like when we cut back to them on the ship and it was still kind of like, I didn't really understand why it was so important at this point. I know they told the viewers like, well, we need to, we need to
find the Watcher, but they're finding the Watcher down on the planet.
Yeah, they're already on that mission, which there's no reason why they can't just do it the way they're doing it, which I find actually more interesting because it's almost a little bit more of like solving a mystery versus like, Agnes has to be partially assimilated, and then while being partially assimilated, they have this couple scenes. Well, I'll cut to it here in a second, but this was kind of interesting because they also argue about it for a while, where Picard's like, I can't let this happen to you, and it goes back and forth for this, her trying to convince him, and then finally he's just like, okay, fine. And then in this moment she's like, I know you'll take care of me, or whatever she says, and he cuts her off by like plugging her neck into this thing. Which also, does she have a port already in her neck? Because there's no, like, you don't see any. Also,
he seems to plug it into her jugular vein, not to like her spinal cord, not to like her brain in any way.
It just was like it went in so easily that it looks like she already had a port here. Which, I mean, whatever. That's not. I don't really care that much about that. But anyway,
it's not here and
so this is actually after this Borg mind meld. That's what I'm going to call it. I'm coining that because it was kind of a mind meld, but with the Borg. Actually, no. This is during, and she's like looking at Picard, and you have a couple moments here where she's telling Picard stuff while it's happening, but very like important things that she's telling him. Like she's accessing my angry room now, or like an angry place. And then she starts like basically yelling at Picard. And then she's like, oh, she left that room and is in a different room. So we're to understand that basically the Borg Queen is in her head and is, for whatever reason, going through different memories and different sections of her brain. And I don't know if the Borg's ever done this in the past.
They talked a lot about the division between the conscious and the subconscious in ways I didn't really understand why they brought that up, or whether there was any sort of actual like basis in human psychology to what they were talking about, but it seemed neither here nor there. The point was that they sort of established a power dynamic with the Borg Queen and got a little bit of information.
Yeah, it was a plot device, but so I guess what I'm saying is like I just think it could have felt a little I don't know. It just felt clunky for some reason, because I just think when it came to her saying, and no, now the Borg Queen's in my sad room, or in the sad place, and then she starts getting really sad, and I don't think, like, in the past when the Borg would assimilate people, I think the scary thing about how it would happen is, like, you just all of a sudden, was it nanites that all of a sudden just start taking over your body and start building you into, like, part machine, and, like, you're being assimilated?
It would happen very fast. He said
this
something
was like
about
a psychological assimilation.
First-time assimilation can take, he said, hours or, like, half a day or something.
Sure, maybe full assimilation.
Yeah, I guess.
But like before, the Borg would literally just like and like grab a person, and it was like scary and weird.
Although to be honest,
I guess
what assimilation was different in the Next Generation versus First Contact, and then again versus
and that's fair.
Voyager.
Like they can change it. They have that right to like kind of add things to what assimilations can be, and that's cool. But either way, like it just I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of what was happening here, but whatever. It happened and it's cool. And so here's after. So her whole mission was to get the Borg Queen to kind of come back online, which she does. Agnes then falls asleep. But she basically, like, it was too much for her, and Picard has to pull the plug, and then the Borg Queen's kind of like, I'm the Borg Queen. It's another really dark image there. That one's a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it.
I think that's all this. Oh, no, and then we have one more. Okay, and I wanted to have this one, too, because then... take a gander, take a look at this image, and then cut to Joel. So basically, Agnes then turns the tables and suddenly is like, I access stuff in your brain there, Borg Queen. What do you think about that, Tim?
Yeah. Well, like I was saying, it was important to establish that power dynamic because earlier in the episode, she seemed to have already taken over the ship and she's the Borg Queen. She can nanite everything and take over everything. So
yeah, she's already got.
There has to be some power leverage that Picard and Agnes have over the Borg Queen to sort of keep it going.
Plot device. Yep. Feels a little devicey. And yeah, so a lot of the stuff on the ship with Agnes and the Borg Queen, like it just felt like kind of like this needs to happen. But I mean, it's cool. Agnes is obviously a badass, and she is able to play the Borg Queen's game a little bit. And then actually, I think there's a moment where there's a little tip of the hat where the Borg Queen's like, "I like you." Am I right? Didn't that happen?
No, she said, "You just said something that was very difficult and very dangerous. You've impressed me.
You've impressed me." Yeah. So. Yeah, it's an interesting thing going on there. We have like a few more previews. I mean, again, like the episode really was pretty, like not a lot happened. I mean, I said this to you before, a lot did happen.
Well, it was like we're saying, it's an establishing episode. So it was setting up for, I think we're going to spend at least a couple episodes back in 2024. And that's what it was setting up, that stuff, introducing characters and introducing places that they're going to be and what they're doing, where they're going.
Yeah.
So what's left is what happened to Rios.
Oh God. So nobody's going to know. Isn't that like, I gotta fix this. Can anyone tell me, if you're watching, what is this still of? If you watched the episode, if you didn't, please stop watching this now because we give away everything that happens in the episode. We should probably do that in the very beginning. We should always be like, spoilers, do not watch this.
Oh, yeah, usually we remember to mention that, but I mean, we're basically doing that.
So this was probably my biggest problem with this episode was, again, the feeling of clunkiness and things happening because they needed to happen. For me, what's happening here, if you can notice, is that they all are beamed onto Earth, and so Raffi is...
And they get split up.
And which, again, doesn't usually happen unless there's a malfunction with the transporter.
But like remember, they lost all their energy because at that point when they beamed down, although they could have waited to beam down until after they got the ship back. But anyway,
they don't really
She makes a point about how the transporter is barely working, but when they're doing it, and then they beam. So it was sort of expected. But
yeah, but so here's Rios. Well, we'll just get to this quickly. Yeah, here's Rios, and everyone else gets beamed onto the ground, and he's beamed into like midair, and he's falling. And
it's a very funny sequence, right? Because they do that montage of Los Angeles and the Griffith Observatory with California Dreaming, and they all sort of have a cool intros, and then his sort of ends the music and he falls. And
so it does feel like a comedic beat. It does. It feels funny, but then it's actually like it turns into a super serious moment. I don't have the image of this, but when he falls, you kind of realize, you're like, oh, he actually fell really hard, and then blood starts coming out of him, and you're like, oh, he's really hurt. So you're kind of like laughing at like, it kind of felt like it was going to be a comedic beat where he gets up and dusts his jacket off and goes like, oh, that was a malfunction in the transporter. But instead he's laying there and you're like, oh, he's like super hurt. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, he's going to end up in a hospital. I
even before they beam down, they specifically say, don't go to a hospital.
So like as soon as this happens, I'm like, I just knew that he's going to end up in the hospital, and my brain started then extrapolating like what the plot was going to be involving him.
Again, we've seen that before. That's what happened to Chekhov when they went back in time.
Well, even on Futurama with like Fry, and like there's like a lot of different shows where they go back in time and someone ends up, captured, and it's like, so I get it. It makes for interesting television. It makes for drama, but at the same time, like I think it felt a little bit. I don't know, like the fact that he fell out of the air, hit his head.
I like the sequence. I was okay with that. I mean, one way or the other. The thing that I was mostly thinking about, and we'll get to this, the doctor's character.
Okay, yeah.
I don't remember her name. Did we hear her?
No, I don't remember.
Did we hear her name?
I'm sure we did, but we're just going to call her the doctor.
I'm sorry, I usually would have noted that down, but I guess I didn't notice it.
There is already the doctor.
I just sort of noticed that she's very, very. In one way, she's very, very similar to a lot of the sort of romantic opposite female, forward-looking, idealistic characters that we've seen in. I can think of at least like five examples of going back in time, back to Edith Keller, Sarah Silverman or a certain type of character they always meet back in time.
Right.
But one thing that's more interesting is that, of course, she's Latinx, she's Hispanic, and Rios.
So is Rios.
Rios is Hispanic, which I get, and he speaks Spanish.
Yeah.
And obviously, Cristoban Rios is Spanish. We kind of knew that, although I sort of could remember his holograms
I think
were half
he did
like
speak
multi-ethnic.
Spanish in one of the other episodes too, briefly.
Yeah, he'd speak Spanish like he'd like swear in Spanish or something.
Yeah.
Like that. He'd do things like that, which makes sense. And I was sort of just reminded is that we haven't had a lot of Hispanic characters in Star Trek. That's
Right.
sort of been a famous thing that we've never really had. Even though the original series was so diverse, there was no Hispanic characters, and TNG failed to introduce. There was in the second season of the Next Generation, for 2 episodes, they tried to introduce a character called Gomez. I don't know if you remember her.
Oh, I do remember Gomez.
And she was in engineering with
Yeah.
Geordi, and she was supposed to be like a comedic.
Okay.
A comedic beat,
I
like
do
a
remember
comedic,
Gomez,
a
yeah.
comedy side of it, and she was only in 2 episodes.
Yeah.
And I think they were testing her out to see if she'd stay around.
Right.
And she just
Didn't stay.
I think they happened to be really bad episodes. I don't think it was her fault. I actually think she was really great, but she ended up not staying. And then there's not really any other Hispanic. DS9 had one Enrico Muniz, I think, character who was another engineer who basically was like a childlike mentee of O'Brien who dies and is an important sort of plot point in a particular episode. But it's good to sort of again actually have some Hispanic
For sure.
characters and
But it
sort
becomes
of
a plot device here.
explore Rios's character in that angle.
Yeah. And I like Rios, actually. So I do like his character. And in that way, maybe it's another reason why it frustrated me that they just were like, well, we're going to make him the character that bumps his head and ends up like being captured, basically. Like, I mean, it was obvious as soon as this happened, but I didn't know this is how they were going to do it. That basically he'd end up in a hospital that was an illegal hospital, like being run.
Well, it was just a clinic. I don't think it was necessarily illegal,
Clinic.
but she was just like, we also help people that might not have their papers.
Yes. Okay.
We
so
don't ask too many questions.
Yeah. But here you
So
have
you've got
then
a few screenshots, so we can maybe go through.
yeah.
them and
So
talk.
then you have this. This is how he ends up here, and he's Spanish, and he's in a place where they maybe help people who don't have their papers. And he doesn't have any identification. Like as soon
course.
as you see those things happening, you're like, "Oh, I know where this is going."
Yeah, well, the
which is
episodes.
fine.
I get the name of the episode's called Assimilation, which
Yeah.
is something to do with
Culture.
Agnes awkwardly was sort of being assimilating, but really it's sort of assimilation as the immigrant experience in America.
Yeah, which I think is really, really poignant and like an important thing to talk about. And so I'm glad they're doing it. I just, for whatever reason, again, it feels like.
No, I'm
feels
liking
like-
it, and I think they're going to explore it deeper going forward. Like I think that's very.
Oh, they
clear.
will. You can tell. Yeah, they're just opening this up. But yeah. So anyway, so here he is. So
We have
this
this
is
kid.
not him. This is not Rios.
And
This is
there's-
the child.
And there's
who takes his
a
comm
very
badge.
awkward sort of play with the comm badge where he can't, and he almost gets the comm badge back from the kid,
And
the
then she
doctor
stops
mother
it.
comes by and takes it back.
Well, she basically says like you were just conning this kid into giving this back. But the thing that's weird
No,
is
I
like,
think she said the kid was conning him, that the kid was going to give it back to him anyway, and he's got a cookie out of it, and he's like, she didn't want to give the cookie to the kid.
but did he didn't get the comm badge back?
No, he didn't get
though.
the comm badge
That's my point. Is he didn't get it back. So
that's fine.
whoever was conning who, like he's the one who lost out because he didn't
So
get his comm
while we're
badge
talking
back.
about the kid,
Yeah.
the one thing that I actually think was one of the most interesting things about this episode is they refer to Rick and Morty.
Right, you mentioned that,
That-
which I didn't pick up on that.
The mother refers to Rick and Morty, but it establishes that Rick and Morty exists in the Star
this
Trek
world.
universe, which is
Yeah.
actually a huge thing. On Star Trek, contemporary pop culture never exists.
Right.
It-
Yeah, you mentioned that.
like Star Wars doesn't exist. No, pop music doesn't exist. It's always, whenever they reference anything, it's always Shakespeare,
Right.
or Sherlock Holmes,
Well-
or like classical music, or even there's the references of like Greeks or something like that. It's always something that's older. But even if they want to do pop culture, it's like
A made-up name.
it's made up. It's like a made up Dixon Hills sort of a contrast with the Maltese Falcon or Sam Spade or whatever, Chandler or whatever. But or the same, if they want to do explore pop culture science fiction, it's like a removed 50s
Yeah.
B movie type science fiction. They've never actually nodded their head to the
What's the
existence of
implication
contemporary pop
in your
culture.
mind?
Well, because if it is Rick and Morty, and Rick and Morty clearly exists in a world where there's Star Trek, because Rick and Morty has done tons of Star Trek references. So is it the same Rick and Morty, or is it a Rick and Morty where there isn't Star Trek? What would be
Does it
like
matter?
watching Rick and Morty in this universe?
Yeah, what would it be like?
And they also sort of sort of ask the question that Star Trek has gone forward in time a few times already in many ways that they've deviated from our sort of universe that we exist in now. So in Star Trek, the 90s had the eugenics wars.
Right.
And there already were in more of a dystopian culture in that Deep Space Nine episode where they go back around to 2017. So there's already things that have had been differently in the Star Trek universe.
Right.
So this seems to establish it maybe a little bit more back in our universe. And this is the real history because this is before some events that's actually going to spread off into the two different timelines. So this is the actual true timeline of Star Trek.
Yeah, and so like remembering that's the whole point of what they're getting at here is they had to go to 2024 because something happened that then split them off into another timeline, which was terrible. And Q is the one who's orchestrating this all, just kind of reestablishing like what's going on here.
I did notice when he was talking to the kid, he mentioned Vulcans a couple times. Rios did.
Yeah,
and
so
remember in the Bowman trailer that we see Vulcans. So it seems like there might
Watcher.
be the Watcher would make sense with Vulcans because the Vulcans
even from
were
First Contact and
yeah. Well, even before First Contact, we know the Vulcans were watching Earth.
Right.
So they established that in some other Enterprise and things like that. So that makes sense.
I'm just trying to like picture who this Vulcan Watcher would be. Like, who's going to be the actor, and like, is it someone that we're going to know? Is it going to be someone with a name that we're going to recognize, or will it just be like, here's this? Like, will he or she be a Vulcan that's just, and maybe they won't be Vulcan, but let's say they are they going to just be like integrated and like be like smoking a cigarette and be like, yo, welcome to LA, I'm the Watcher, like, you know what I mean? What will they be like?
The Enterprise episode I always remember, there was the Enterprise, remember there's a Vulcan character, T'Pol.
Yeah.
And she tells a story. It's a really weird episode where it's framed like a Murder, She Wrote, framed like this story happened to my grandmother or great-grandmother.
Yeah,
but basically,
I can remember.
T'Pol, played by the same actress, plays her grandmother.
Yeah.
On Earth, self-contained on Earth in the 1950s. I believe. It might be the 40s. But she could still be alive with the
maybe it's T'Pol's mother
of Vulcans. We might be able to. We might see that the actor.
That would be interesting, because they do seem to like to bring in characters who we've met before, or who they've brought up before. But maybe it'll just be somebody new. And if you have any ideas or thoughts, you're watching this and you want to tell us, I mean, it's neither here nor there at this point. We're going to find out soon anyway. But just let us know what you think. My brother actually had some interesting theories when I was talking to him about some of the plot that might happen here. Maybe I'll talk about it here in a second. He had some interesting theories on what he thought might happen. Okay, so child with the comm badge. And that's the end of the episode. It just ends with this child sitting on the chair, and he says, thanks for watching. And then the episode ends. Just kidding. So then we have this boy band shows up.
Oh, the ice. I guess the only other thing I want to quickly mention is that Rios does a little anecdote about his past and how he was a great pilot as a kid. And that reminded me a lot of Tom Paris. His character seems a lot more like Tom Paris in his backstory and his sort of relationship with Starfleet.
Yeah, because that's a funny moment where the doctor... who just happens to be very attractive and like is the doctor that he's hanging out with and seems also like really like a really cool person. So like, well,
she's very idealistic and like I was saying, forward looking. Like,
what I was going to say is that I should have, just realizing these things make noises, I should have like tied them up here. That's a good idea, Joel.
Right, that's usually what they do.
Because then I don't bump them. Yeah, that's what they do. Shoot, what was I? Oh yeah, so he's telling the story about some of his backstory where you get that, which is kind of cool. I love moments like that with characters where you start to learn about who they are, and then she like cracks his hand back into like he's like dislocated his finger. Yeah, so like you're actually starting to get to know him, and then she's just like, and he's like, oh okay. So anyway, so here comes the police/ICE.
I think they say they have police.
It says police and then ICE.
They don't say LAPD. They say police, which I thought was
police.
Odd.
Yeah, and they have these. I don't know what's on the front of their shirts. I tried to take a screenshot here where we could see it better, and I wanted us to maybe be able to read it. Can we zoom? How does this work? Oh, Department of Homeland Security Police.
Oh, interesting.
So
that's.
I think we're still zoomed in, aren't we? A little bit. There we go.
So Homeland Security. I don't know if that means that.
Oh, we're still zoomed in. Oh, we can do whatever we want.
I mean, I guess I don't know exactly the relationship between ICE and Homeland Security.
The lady in the background is not concerned at all about what's going on. Not moving. Yeah, sorry. So
because ICE was introduced at the same time as Department of Homeland Security. They're both like.
I don't know the history on any of that. But.
They're both like Bush era stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if they're just like intentionally not having them as ICE or Because I don't think
But it did say ice on the back, I think.
Did it?
Yeah, I think it did.
Okay, well then maybe that
Tell
makes
us if you
perfect
watched
sense.
and let us know, but I'm pretty sure it did say ice on the back.
I just know it was the police, but I called them. They were clearly ice.
Yeah, so anyway, they're here being like, this is who here doesn't have their papers, who's illegal, an illegal immigrant here, and of course,
well, everyone runs away. By the time they break in, it's just
the doctor.
Rios comes back for some reason that I was a
Well, he
little
doesn't want to leave her.
confused
He says he doesn't want to leave her alone. He's like worried about her. Yeah.
And he also wants the badge, really, though.
You think? Oh,
because the communicator
I
badge
didn't
is
know.
still right
nice.
there on the desk.
Yeah, it
And that's
shows
what he
it.
really cares
Shows it
about.
at the end.
So
Because really, we're basically, this is the end of the episode. This is how the episode ends, where the cliffhanger is like, oh gosh, Rios is being arrested or being taken. Which I just knew it was gonna, like, it didn't shock. It wasn't like the episode ended and I was like, oh wow, like what's gonna happen next? I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I knew was gonna happen as soon as he hit his head. I was like, he's gonna be
well, he's gonna get in trouble,
captured,
and they're gonna need to rescue him.
Yeah, which is fine. It makes.
I'm excited. I want to see them fight some ice and free Rios.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not going to say I'm not excited. I think it's just it was predictable, which again doesn't. It's okay sometimes if you kind of have a feeling you know what's going on, but in this case, I don't know why. It just because even the fact that like he as soon as he's talking Spanish, and then these people show up that are like, "Hey, we're here to get people that don't have papers," and you know right off like he has no identification. He's not going to be able to say who he is, so they're going to be like, "You're an illegal alien," which.
Why don't you assimilate into American culture?
Yeah, no, and I think it will be a great way for them to, look at the real issue there, which is like, they're going to be
immigrant rights,
right? There you go. Okay, so really, we're basically at the end. Oh, this is basically. I wanted the last shot, and that is the last freeze frame, which it's hard to know what's going on here. But basically, he's being arrested. So because the episode was over,
arrested for nothing, for just being a guy that looked Hispanic.
And yeah, so they don't know who he is. They don't know what's going on, but they're just like, we're badass cop boys or whatever we are, and this guy fits the bill. So let's just take him in and. I don't know. Would they have done it if he didn't talk back? Maybe not. Like he was pretending to be a doctor at the end, which I thought was great. I was like, hey, he's doing a great job at pretending to be a doctor. And then they're just like, you just know it's coming, and they say, give us your identification. And he kind of goes blank because it's like, well, he can't. He literally has nothing.
Well, yeah, but if I was walking down the street and a cop came up to me and said, give me your identification, I'd be in the same place. Why would I?
You'd have identification, I think.
Would
I think probably. I guess my point is that he is literally from the future. He's not just a guy who lives in this world. He actually is from the future and doesn't have identification, not because he's an illegal alien, but I mean,
I don't always carry my driver's license. I usually have my driver's license maybe in the car or something, but like I have it when I drive. But
right. Well, if you're trying to then emphasize that they were basically jerks to him and they were being assholes and just like power tripping, yes, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I remember he said a line that was funny. It's like, so Rio said something along the line like, "What's going on here? Are you my boss?"
Yeah. He literally is like, are you my boss? Are you like here to tell me what to do? Because he's saying there's a patient in the back that's needs medical attention. Doctor, we need to go help this patient. And then they see his hand and they're like, you look like you just had medical attention here. Like you're not.
It didn't really make any sense to me.
I don't know if it did or didn't. I just think this is how this episode ends. And so one of the last frames it shows is his comm badge. So clearly they wanted to establish with the audience that he didn't get it back, even though he basically, the kid had it and was like, here, I'll take a cookie for a comm badge. And then the doctor comes in and is like, no, and then he doesn't get it. Because if he had had his comm badge in this moment, this is going to change everything. Because what's going to happen is Raffi and Seven are going to show up and be like, here's Rios. Oh, it's just his comm badge. Where is Rios? Maybe someone there, maybe the lady sitting in the back. Yeah,
so there was a couple characters that were introduced. There was another doctor.
There she is.
Maybe a nurse. There was another doctor or a nurse. No, there were characters that had lines that we were introduced to, and that guy. So
it's gonna be her. She's gonna be the new main character. She's the Watcher.
There were a couple characters that we were introduced with that Raffi and Seven can talk to and then figure out where they went, and then they'll go and rest.
And then they'll go, well, I don't know if this is going to be a season arc, so this might not be till, like, I think they're going to maybe try to create some drama around, they haven't gotten Rios yet, but they need to get back. The timeline's collapsing. I don't know, whatever it's going to be. You think they'll get him quick?
I think they'll get him quick.
Okay.
At least that's the rhythm we've so far this season. They haven't wasted time on that type of nonsense.
Yeah.
They've just gone and gone quick. And I feel like the doctor character is going to stay around longer for the same reason that Sarah Silverman always just hanged out with
Yeah, you need like a liaison into the current time. Like she'll be the one that'll be like, if you want to talk to this person, you have to walk this way because that's how we walk in 2024. Literally, that's what's gonna happen. And then they'll have like a whole scene where they're like trying to learn to walk, and they'll be like left and then right, and she'll be like, "You're catching on." And it'll be like a montage
of
learning to walk like you're in the 2024.
Interesting, because you think about like I feel like the 1940s had a walk.
Yeah.
And the 1920s had a walk.
Oh yeah, I'm not joking.
And the 1970s had a walk. If you think about it, like the late 70s, like disco walk.
You're darn right, disco walk. I'm also
maybe we're too close to the time right now to really understand.
We don't know we have a walk.
What the walk is, but
that's what I'm saying.
There's a walk.
But she's going to teach them the walk. I'm also picturing like Monty Python, the Ministry of Silly Walks.
Silly Walks.
Yeah, so I'm like picturing a scene like mixed with Star Trek and Monty Python. But that's the episode. So we know they've set up some stuff. I still think again that the Borg, really the main crux of the end of the season will be the situation with the Borg Queen, and she's going to kind of, once she kind of has, and she has a lot of power right now. She literally is connected to the whole ship. So there's going to be something that happens there. That creates drama.
I thought, they didn't turn her off. They talked about turning her off. I think they left her on.
Getting mad at Picard for like not like just shooting her.
They left her on because I think they're going to keep her around for more information. Although the point is that they can have more of those interesting discussions where she says stuff and.
Hey, you were sad once.
Yeah.
Well, maybe what will happen
Locutus.
Because Locutus, Picard is the main character obviously is Picard. The main emotional story arc as well as the main physical story arc revolves around Picard. He something in 2024 affected his life or his lineage or something. So the thing my brother was saying is that you had mentioned this before too, that Patrick Stewart has a connection to fighting for rights of like abused women and giving a voice to abused women. And the question was, so I said to my brother, we were talking about this, and I said, I don't know if it's believable that Picard could have been this evil dictator that he was played out to be in this other timeline. And my brother said, I do believe it. I think that in some ways anyone can become that evil dictator if they are driven by fear, driven by wanting to control the things that... So my brother brought up, what if Picard didn't have like a good... something in the past, and I'm not just going to say like not a good childhood because that's not an excuse to become an evil dictator, but at least some abuse in the past, whether it was abuse to... And I said, oh, well, this might make sense because we actually saw a flashback of Picard when he was in this kind of the stargazing room before he went
there's
into
definitely
the Stargazer.
Something there.
And it showed what looked like abuse. It showed what looked like someone being abused and maybe some... And I assumed in that moment, I was like, well, that's maybe Picard as a kid and maybe that's his mother. And maybe it was still.
Well, that's what I read. And also like we were saying with the context of Patrick Stewart's own history. Yeah,
so I guess what in 2024, maybe that was just Jean-Luc Picard's history as a child, and maybe he did see his mother abused. But what if there was something that happened in 2024 that changed the course of how he would respond to that abuse in a way that then made him like, so maybe the mother that protected him from being abused by the abuser because she took the abuse wasn't there for some reason, and he took the abuse, and then he became this evil dictator based on that. And anyway, so I thought that was an interesting theory.
That makes sense, and we're definitely going to go back to Picard's childhood somehow. I think that's
absolutely.
I don't know how that really fits into the
2024.
The time dynamic, and it's not just Picard, but Seven was also an authoritarian dictator, even more than him. Like he was more because he had like skulls and stuff. But everyone was a jerk,
right? And so I think it was when I was talking to my brother, and I said, so do you think, maybe it was to you that we were talking about this, I said, do you think that Picard becoming this like evil dictator would have changed all of Starfleet? Like would have really made, like, is that possible? That it, so that's it.
But it doesn't make sense. I think the event has to be back in 2024, and that changes. It changes Starfleet's. It changes the founding of the Federations because I think it's changing changing First Contact. It's changing the relationship the Vulcans have with humans, so that they never really become the Federation and that sort of dynamic. I think, and they always are just humans without the Federation.
So you
and
think
they become more and more xenophobic and then authoritarian, and then they try to conquer everyone.
So you think the way the Federation is what affected Picard to become an evil dictator, and not that something affected Picard to become an evil dictator, which then affected the Federation?
I think that's what's narratively happening. I think that is actually a problem. I don't think you can take Picard and then pay
a normal Picard and make him evil just by the Federation.
The Federation doesn't exist.
That's what I'm saying.
And then you're suddenly evil. Now, I agree with you there.
Yeah.
I think
so there has to be something more. And I think maybe that's when I was talking to my brother. What my brother was getting at is not necessarily that the event in 2024 is this like Picard's ancestor and something happens there, but more that yes, the Federation was changed. Yes, something happened with the Federation in 2024 that set them on a different course, but also that something happened to Picard, why he also did fall under that, like, I'm going to become an evil dictator.
Right.
But then it does still bring up, why did also Seven become an evil dictator?
Yeah,
why did also Raffi become, like, why was
Raffi
everyone
seemed to
evil?
Be evil. Yeah, I don't know if they're really going to explore it quite that way.
They'll probably use fear as, like, fear I think is a huge driving factor why people end up fear and ignorance.
I think
being hateful.
I think their characters are actually more of a plot hole than they want to actually deal with. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
I think they're going to focus on that, but I'm not certain. I mean, we definitely will explore his childhood more. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that
there is going to be that.
It doesn't feel like Picard's Chateau Picard and the Picard people are that connected to the Federation or Starfleet before Picard. Like, obviously, Butterfly, if there's no Federation, Earth is completely different, and there's been a different sort of disasters with World War III and with climate change, that in this parallel universe there's the solar shield, and they never solved those problems and then the regular Starfleet timeline they sort of help solve with the help of the Vulcans and stuff. So without that, but yeah, I don't really see. I don't know.
Well, So I think. So you think maybe they won't tackle all that? I think they're, like you said, they're going to show Picard's childhood.
Trying to explain how Picard could actually be a dictator actually is going to pose more problems than they could. So I don't think that's a choice. I don't, because Q said something that was interesting in this episode. He was in for a second. He said the only thing you understand, referring to them like fighting with some people. And then Picard says, "What else has been lost in the wake of your fear?"
Oh, we're missing. Sorry to interrupt you. We're missing a bunch of comments from Mac.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we never follow along.
We should have been looking. Oh, so it was asking some good questions based on what we were saying. Where do you think they crash landed, and do you think it's going to be important? Well, Picard certainly said home, going home.
Yeah, they didn't.
The biobed was keeping him alive. Yeah, the biobed then was then destroyed by the energy being, and that's why they were like, we need to kill the Borg Queen, because if we kill her, then the biobed will keep him alive. So it was like a choice between Elnor and the Borg Queen. Which, yes, that definitely. So Picard is following the usual Star Trek time travel tropes of one of the male characters falling for a local contemporary woman. The comedy bits of this episode were done well, not overdone, not appropriately inappropriate. Sorry to be just reading these comments, but we want to be keeping up with this stuff. And so we're sorry that we didn't see this stuff. I like this fall because it seemed like it was going to be a comic direction. Then suddenly it was... Well, yeah, so that was almost like a complaint I had, but it did seem like it was going to be comedic. And then it was like, oh no, he's really hurt. But even the way he fell, was kind of comedic, because his body kind of did this weird flip that seemed like...
Well, he didn't fall right. He caught the escape. And then
so Mac's saying all good. So I'm glad you're still watching there, Mac, and that we can now acknowledge the stuff that you've been saying. So thanks for tuning in, and thanks for sharing your thoughts. There are a lot of Cisco references this season. Did you catch any of those?
Well, I think I was reminded a lot of the episode where Cisco go back in time to a similar time period.
Right. Mac, what do you think of the 2024 incident? What's your thoughts on, if you have time to I guess you probably have to type something out that was pretty extensive, but we're really curious about what's going to happen there. And
but I'm still super excited about this season.
I am too. I got to say
the pacing's great. I like the establishment. I'm less worried about them wasting time and doing things that annoy me. I think they're going to get right to the action. I think they're going to get right to Rios doing something interesting and being freed, not spend a lot of time looking for Rios. That I don't think anyone wants to deal with that.
Yeah, no, I'm like, overall, I want to make sure I state that, because I've complained a lot about this episode and kind of made fun of little things. But overall, I'm still excited about this season, like I really am, and I'm enjoying it. I do hope that they have some more smaller moments where characters can be explored in a little deeper way. Max saying, sorry, typing on the phone. No worries, Mac. I know I asked a really loaded question. Like, hey, can you give us your prediction here? And maybe we'll check it later and talk about it next episode as well, if we don't have time. But yeah, I just think, I think overall it's good. Oh, I was going to say, I said, oh, and then I like, sorry if you have earphones in, and that like just popped yours. But I missed the Q in this episode a little bit too. I miss Q. I don't know why I keep calling him the Q. It's the Borg, and he's just Q. But I miss seeing him a little more. He was there for a second. He kind of like said a little thing quickly to Picard. I think he's so heavily involved in what's happening here. I'm surprised he's not there kind of feeding little riddles to Picard more, like being
right,
like,
or why they need to give up so much stuff to the, but there has to be that dynamic with the Borg Queen. Shouldn't they have that dynamic be with Q?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. So because Q, and maybe they're trying to like save that for a later episode to kind of bring him back in and be like, okay, this is going on. But I definitely, because this is one of those, the game is afoot with Q, why he's not a little more involved in like in stuff. But so let me see.
But Q never gets his hands dirty.
That son of a gun. Max saying, I'm really excited about how they're approaching the time travel, but there's a lot of loose threads in the storyline that I suspect they will come back to. Yeah, for sure. And I'm not sure that they'll restore the timeline exactly. Yeah, so it may diverge, and so it's not just a restored timeline, but it's like this is where we're at now. I think
we talked a little bit about it seemed too good that everyone was all happily in Starfleet.
Yeah,
at the start of the season.
Yeah, and I didn't. It's funny because I didn't pick up on that. I was just like, "Oh, this is nice," but then you were like, "Yeah, it was like too good to be true." I was like, "Oh crap, yeah, you're right." Like it was just everyone. All the loose ends were tied up. Everyone was happy. Everyone was doing the best that they could.
Except for Seven and Raffi, their relationship.
Yeah, but it was almost like in a way where like you knew like if it stayed on this timeline, 4 episodes later they would be like fine and they'd be like off on adventures.
That arc seemed to be something that they're dealing with right now.
Yeah. Well, and it was funny too because in the moment where they were on this tall building or whatever, and Seven says, "Myself and my partner here wanted to blah blah blah," and Raffi kind of looks over at her like, "Oh, you called me." Like, so there's that kind of inability, or like they haven't quite acknowledged that are they a couple? Like they're not officially maybe a couple, but then when Seven said that, it was kind of like, oh, so maybe they can explore the relationship a little deeper even now because Seven has kind of said, because sometimes it takes that with couples, like one person has to make the commitment first, and it takes some of the fear away from like saying like, yeah, we're a couple. So maybe we'll go a little deeper.
I don't know if that really makes sense because remember they've been together for 2 years, right?
Not on camera.
That's the problem. We haven't seen that, but they have been together for 2 years.
Yeah, but they need to be together on camera now for the audience.
Exactly.
So like seeing them, it was kind of like they were like on a date accidentally because it was like, oh, we're on this like tall building, and we're messing with the security guard. Yeah, the more I talk about that scene, I'm like, yeah, I kind of like that. It's kind of fun.
I agree.
The security guard thing was like, I think my beef there is he was just a really bad security guard. He was just really bad.
But it's a security guard for like a skyscraper.
Right. Yeah. What can go wrong? Just a child could like leap off the top because as long as they convince the security guard.
Die Hard.
Yeah, sure. I was gonna say this. Anyone could just be like, "Don't you want to be the fun security guard?" And he just always falls for it. It's like, you hit your mic. What are you doing?
That's the cost of Earl Grey.
We've gone through almost the full Earl Grey canister.
Yeah, it's late for Tim to drink.
I find Earl Grey dries me out. Like I drink Earl Grey tea, and by the end of it, I'm like, I need just like a glass of water. So maybe that's why Picard's always like this. He's like,
well, I imagine sitting in front of lights and talking
pretty good Picard
for an hour. Pretty good. Sitting in front of lights and talking for an hour is actually probably pretty drying, and the amount of
but it's
Earl
an LED
Grey
light. Oh. No, you're very right. Yeah, good assessment. But it's got some caffeine, and so I think I'm ready to do another couple hours of this. What do you think?
No, well, I think our episode is now longer as usual than the actual episode.
My brother actually another comment my brother made was like, can you guys get to the point a little bit quicker? Like, yeah.
No, that's definitely true, but whatever.
But we like to go on about, and hopefully you guys, Mac and my brother, and maybe Steven watches these too, that we like talking about Star Trek, and we actually really enjoy discussing different things in the episodes, and we're having fun. Man, I missed this. I missed when we were doing this before and we were watching Picard. So we've talked a little bit about watching some other shows and discussing those. We've got this room set up now. Why not? Oh, there's Tim. There's Tim. There's Joel. Why not you? Whoop, there he is. Oh.
Okay.
Why not use it to its fullest
All right,
potential?
we're going off the rails.
We've lost it. Okay. So that was good. So let us know what you think. Let us know if we're crazy. If you completely disagree and think this is the best episode ever. I mean, I know Tim liked it more than I did, but I kind of thought it was the weakest so far. But sometimes that is how you feel about it. It's a bit of a filler episode.
It was a very different type of episode than the first two.
Yeah. But anyway, we'll be back next week. Usually, so we're going to stick to Thursday going live after the episodes. So, correct? So we'll see everyone next Thursday. I was glad to be back in person. I'm over the COVID thing, tested negative, completely over it. So I'm super happy about that. Anyone who's gone through it, I feel you. Hopefully everyone's doing well. Subscribe, like. We got people say those things on YouTube channels. Like, subscribe, comment, click the bell. Do we have a bell on our channel?
I don't think so.
I wish we could make ours look like a little comm badge. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope as always we kept you engaged.